Sangye churdak soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kapsuchi dagi chunyen gi pesonam ki drola penchir sangye drupan shu. Sangye churdak soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kapsuchi dagi chunyen gi pesonam ki drola penchir sangye drupan shu. Sangye cherdang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kapsuchi dagi chenyen gi pesonam ki drola penchir sangye drupar sho.
Okay, so let's just start with a few minutes of meditation on the breath. So I think everyone knows how to sit and what to do here. So just bring your mind inside and find your breath as it goes in and out through your nostrils. And then shutting out everything else from your mind except your breath. Just keep your mind fully focused on it as it goes in and out. So, for those of us who are not practiced in this kind of focusing meditation, stabilizing meditation, it's what Lama Zopa Rinpoche would call effortful. We have to notice as soon as our mind goes away from the breath, and we have to consciously bring it back. And we need to keep doing that over and over again. So it's also called placement meditation, placing the mind on the breath, or more like replacement meditation, because the mind keeps going off the breath and we have to replace it. By the way, today would have been Lama Zopa Rinpoche's 78th birthday, but as we know, he left us in April. So the better we get at this meditation, the calmer and clearer, sort of more expansive our mind becomes, and also more joyful and blissful, the stronger our concentration. So those prayers we just did are to prepare our mind for receiving, thinking about the Dharma. So by doing them, we create merit and purify our mind a little bit. Still, now with whatever clarity of mind we have after focusing on the breath for a few minutes, we should look into our mind and check our motivation for being here this morning. Ask yourself, why am I here? Why am I spending my Sunday morning on Zoom? So if you find your motivation is one that's just concerned for gaining some kind of advantage or happiness or pleasure or comfort for this life alone, you should recognize that motivation, that kind of motivation, as coming from attachment, which itself is rooted in ignorance. And if we follow that sort of worldly motivation, we create negative karma, we leave a negative imprint in our consciousness, and sooner or later that will ripen into experience of dissatisfaction and suffering. So instead we, as mentioned in those prayers, still we should just remind ourselves now that we should not follow that sort of negative motivation and replace it with a positive one. So we can think, since beginningless time, I've been circling in samsara, cyclic existence. Being reborn and dying, being reborn in dying. Since beginningless time, mostly in the lower realms. But this time, kind of miraculously, I've received a perfect human rebirth, which gives me every opportunity to practice Dharma. So having found this perfect human rebirth, my responsibility is to lead all sentient beings out of suffering to enlightenment. That's the reason my previous lives created the karma for me to receive this rebirth that I have now. With this rebirth, I can create the causes to be reborn in the upper realms, especially I can create the cause for another perfect human rebirth in order to continue my practice. But still, like this life, that one would be subject to impermanence and death. And after that one, I could again be reborn in the lower realms. So that's positive motivation, but not enough. Because with this life, I can create the cause to escape from the beginningless cyclic existence and attain liberation or nirvana, state of everlasting blissful consciousness. So that's a much higher level of motivation to aim for liberation, but it's still not enough because in attaining that, I leave behind all the kind sentient beings upon whom I've depended for all my happiness, including liberation. So just to seek my own liberation, my own everlasting blissful happiness is in a way selfish and cruel. So what I should really do with this life is to understand, develop, generate bodhicitta, the determination to reach enlightenment, not just for myself, but in order to be able to enlighten all sentient beings. So the bodhicitta motivation, the motivation of a bodhisattva, is what created the Kurukulla Center. It's the reason we have teachings at Kurukulla, and that should be our motivation for being here. We wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So think, that's what I'm doing here. So it's good if we can actually motivate like that, the moment we get up in the morning. His Holiness Dalai Lama said that the first thing he tries to think, or he does think, when he wakes up is things do not exist as they appear. So on top of that, you can also think, suffering sentient beings do not exist as they appear. They appear to be suffering. They don't really exist that way. So why should we try to save them? But the thought that things do not exist as they appear is sort of an ultimate thought, but relatively, sentient beings do exist and they are suffering. And we really live in the world of karma, world of cause and effect, in the world of delusion, ignorance, attachment, aversion. So even though things don't exist as they appear yet, I'm going to devote everything I do today to enlightening sentient beings. So if we can think like that in the morning, it's very useful. And then we're liable to forget. So during the day, we can remind ourselves, is this what I'm doing? Anyway, in order to practice, we need to study the teachings. As the previous great yogis said, the person who tries to meditate without first studying is like an armless rock climber. And these days we can watch people scaling El Capitan and, sheer rock faces without ropes. It'd be pretty difficult to do that without arms. So we need to study the teachings. And these days there are lots of things we can study. So this time we have this teaching on 100 verses of advice, Tibetan Buddhist teachings on what matters most, which were given by the great yogi Padampa Sangye. So anyway, I think in on the calendar, Kurukulla calendar, and the emails and stuff, links have been given to the text and also to this book and to the 100 verses themselves as they appear in this book. And and also there's a link to the life of Padampa Sangye on Treasury of Lives, which is a great website, by the way, Treasury of Lives, which has the biographies of all the great, well, many of the great figures in Tibetan Buddhism. It's still a work in progress. And in that Treasury of Lives biography, the person who wrote it refers a lot to this book, The Blue Annals, which is in two parts. It's basically history of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. So there's a lot of references in here to Padampa Sangye, which I'm not going to go into, but it's there if you really want to get into his life. Also, in David Malk's book, there's extensive biography of Padampa Sangye. I was going to talk a bit about it, but I thought we had 6 sessions, but we only have 4. So, Geshe-la gets back sort of around the middle, just after the middle of January. So we thought he may want to take a week or 2 off, but no, he wants to dive straight back in. So luckily for you, I'm down to 4. However, I will read the brief introduction by Tulsi Rinpoche on what he says about Padampa Sangye. Tulsi Rinpoche was the Lama at the Thupten Churling monastery in Solukhumbu in Nepal. And that was the place where Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa Rinpoche's first student, Zena, went to do a retreat in 1972. So I came along in October 72 and she was already up there. So she passed away in, I think, August of 73. So I never got to meet her. But she was at Tulsi Rinpoche's monastery. So he was a great Nyingma Lama, and he was the one of the great lamas of the 20th century in Solukhumbu. So he does a little praise at the beginning of his preface. He says, Om Svasti. That's sort of a expression of auspiciousness. Om actually in Tibetan Buddhism represents the holy body, speech, and mind, the body, speech, and mind of the enlightened being. You know, Om, the letter Om, has three parts: A, O, Ma. A, which is the root syllable. I don't know if anybody's reciting this, the names of Noble Manjushri. That's His Holiness the Dalai Lama suggested we recite that as much as possible for the next few months to facilitate the quick return of the unmistaken reincarnation of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So in there's a verse that, so in one of the names for Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, is the syllable A, the supreme syllable A. And in the Tibetan and Sanskrit alphabet, in the consonants, every letter, every syllable has A, kaka, gagama, cha 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 na ta. Like A is the sound of every consonant. And also in Kandrala's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, she finishes with everything residing in the blissful consciousness of Ah. So Ah is the, we did the Heart Sutra just before. So that's one of the shorter versions of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. There's, the 100,000 and the 25,000, the 8,000. Geshe Tsorga once gave us the oral transmission of the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines. And there's the Diamond Sutra, Diamond Cutter Sutra. Then there's the Heart Sutra. And the Perfection of Wisdom in a single letter is the letter A. So Om consists of A, O, and Ma, Om. Om Svasti, lion of the word. So I think lion was an epithet. This is the lion of the Siddhas, an epithet for Padampa Sangye, the author of this text we'll be looking at. Lion of the word, who in the Holy Land and other places, the Holy Land is India, assumed a human form and lived for as long as 600 years. I don't think that's literal, because if you look in the Treasury of Lies, he was born sometime in the 10th century and he died in 1117. Also, some places you see Nagarjuna lived for 600 years, but conventionally he lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. his wondrous life of liberation. To him, sublime one, long life Vidyadhara, I respectfully bow down. To the people of Tingri in Tibet, which is where he gave this teaching, the very words he spoke, the 100 verses, profoundest of the profound, exquisitely adorning speech heard everywhere and everywhere renowned, are in this excellent book, well clarified and truly well explained by he who was the intentional reincarnate display of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. So he's one of the Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo lived, I think, maybe more than 100 years ago in Tibet, one of the greatest ever of Tibetan lamas. The second Buddha of Tibet. You'll see there are lots of second Buddhas of Tibet, like Lama Tsongkhapa was also called the second Buddha of Tibet. To him, omniscient, unchanging holder of the supreme vehicle teachings, whose adamantine tongue pronounced these words, I pay heartfelt homage. So he's praising Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the incarnation of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. So he he went into exile from Tibet and lived in Bodha, and had many well-known students. Maybe Mathieu Ricard, the French monk, is maybe the best known of his Western students. So Tulsi Rinpoche says, by way of an introduction to this book, following these opening verses, I'd like to say a few words about the master known in the Holy Land of India as Acharya Vikramaśīla and in Tibet as Padampa Sangye. So who knows what Vikramaśīla's who he was and what his main claim to fame was? Anyone?
Is that the same Vikramaśīla that wrote the Bhavanakrama?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Maybe that's his main claim to fame. One of his other main claims to fame is when so the first Dharma king of Tibet, Songtsen Gampo, began to introduce Dharma to Tibet in about 650 AD. And then his third successor, King Trisong Detsen, around the middle of the next century, 750, really kickstarted Buddhism in Tibet by inviting Padmasambhava, the Guru Rinpoche, the great tantric yogi, to come to Tibet and remove hindrances to the development and spread of Dharma in Tibet. And they established a monastery called Samye Ling in southern Tibet. And the great Indian abbot, Sangharakshita, came and established the monastic tradition in Tibet. He ordained first 5 Tibetan monks. And around that time, there was a Chinese monk, a Zen monk called Hashang Mahayana, who was on pilgrimage. He'd come to pilgrimage in Tibet, and he wanted to introduce what we know as Zen Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, the sort of so-called sudden enlightenment school. And so there was a dispute about what should be the Buddhism of Tibet. The Chinese school, Chan, the precursor of Zen, or what we call the Lamrim teachings, the stages of the path. I don't think they were called that then. The teaching, the gradual path of enlightenment that was presented in Maitreya Sangha's texts, like the Abhisamaya Lankara and so forth, where the Lamrim teachings that we study come from. So they arranged a debate between the great Indian scholar Vikramaśīla and Hashang Mahayana. And so I think that was organized by King Trisong Detsen. And Kamalashila won the debate, so they sent Hashang Mahayana back to China, and that's the Buddhism that prevailed. Although it didn't prevail right at that time, because a couple of centuries later, King Langdama tried to get rid of Buddhism from Tibet and re-establish the original spiritual tradition of Bon. And he was quite successful in wiping out a lot of Dharma from Tibet, but then someone assassinated him, a monk called Pelgi Dorji, I think. And then Buddhism, that sort of resuscitated from the ashes, was a bit disorganized. So then they invited Atisha, and then he came and he gave that teaching, lamp for the path, and established the Lamrim tradition in Tibet. So that was Kamalashila. We can thank for that. So they say Padampa Sangye was a reincarnation of Kamalashila. In fact, he was given the name Kamal. Well, I don't think it says here, but in the Treasury of Lives, it said he was given the name. He was known as Kamalashila in Tibet, in India. Also known as Parama Buddha in Tibet, in India, which is the equivalent of Padampa Sangye. Padampa Sangye traveled to Tibet on 3 occasions. So he says here 3 times, but otherwise in the Treasury of Lives it says he came 5 or 7 times. So obviously some of these histories are a bit unclear. On 3 occasions, the first, middle, and final stay there, and we may confidently assume that in doing so, he was guided by the Buddha in his primordial wisdom form of, Vajradhara. Indeed, he had a miraculous stone the Buddha had given him, and from India, he hurled this stone towards Tibet, making the wish that wherever it fell, he would there find disciples to train. He then left for Tibet in search of the stone. It had fallen at a place now known as Tingri Langkor in Lato in the province of Tsang. So he wasn't such a great throw, because from India, that was southern Tibet. So it was just over the border. So anyway, quite convenient, I guess. So, and that's the place where in one of the famous caves of Milarepa is in southern Tibet, in that part of Tibet. And Milarepa and Padampa Sangye also had a famous debate. At the time Padampa Sangye arrived there, snow had been falling, but where the stone lay, he could see a darkened area where all the surrounding snow had melted. He was told that the stone, as it landed, had made the sound ting. The place was therefore called Tingri, and there Padampa Sangye founded his monastic seat at a site where the musk deer walked around in a circle, and which thus became known as Lakor, or Langkor, meaning encircled by musk deer. So Tingri Langkor. It was during his final visit to Tibet that Padampa met Lord Milarepa. So in Treasury of Lives, it says that, he went to Tibet 3, 5, or 7 times. But after the 5th time, he stayed in Tingri till he passed away. So I don't know what the 6th and 7th visits would have been if he stayed in Tingri on his 5th visit and and died there. But Tulsi Rinpoche says it was his third visit, so who knows? He met Lord Milarepa. The place where they came together and took part in a contest of miraculous powers is nowadays known as Nyingchi Drenkang, Compassion Inn. This and other events are recounted in Jetson Milarepa's autobiography. So there's Lobsang Lalungpa has written a book called The Life and Teachings of Milarepa, which is available. And, the Lamas encourage us to read the biographies of the great teachers for inspiration. So years ago, Wisdom Publications published a book called Enlightened Beings by Jan Willis, which is some of the Mahamudra, Tibetan, Gelug Mahamudra lineage holders. And, we have so many biographies. We have biographies of Holiness Dalai Lama. We have the biographies of Ling Rinpoche and Trishik Rinpoche, published by Wisdom, His Holiness's tutors. And there's a couple of wonderful biographies published by Shambhala on Atisha, and Tupan Jinpa's biography of Lama Tsongkhapa. So many for us to study and be inspired by. So also Milarepa's autobiography. So Jamyang Khensi Wangpo, the holder of the 7 transmissions, so he's better known in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions rather than the Gelug. He was an emanation of Acharya Kamalashila, alias Padampa Sangye, and Jamyang Khensi Wangpo in turn chose to reappear as that magical manifestation body, the mighty master of learning and accomplishment, guide of our mandala, the great banner of whose names, which I perforce must mention here, makes the whole world resplendent. Dilgo Khensi Rinpoche, Gyume Tekchok Tempa Gyaltsen, the victory banner of the unchanging great vehicle doctrine. So I never met Dilgo Khensi Rinpoche, but he was in Bodha when I was in Nepal. I don't know why we never went to see him, really. Pygmy Rav Saldawa, Fearless Brilliant Moon. It was he who spoke this wonderful commentary, the text of which has been established, corrected, and translated to English and French by the Padmakara Translation Group in France. So then he praises them. So at this point, we should start looking at the text itself. So do you have, anyone got it on their computer, the root text? There's a link to it in the calendar.
I sent the link out in the chat. I can send it again if someone came in late.
Okay. So you can just follow along there. Anyway, it's the same as it's in this book. Homage to the teacher. Fortunate practitioners gathered here in Tingri. Listen. So they knew he was getting old and going to pass away, so they were lamenting the fact and wondering what they were going to do. A bit like when the Buddha was passing away, all the disciples were wailing and gnashing their teeth. And he said, I remain with you in my teachings. So this was kind of Padampa Sangye's line as well. But he gave this last teaching. Just as worn out clothes can never again be made as new, it's no use seeing a doctor once you're terminally ill. You'll have to go. We humans living on this, so terminally ill means, nowadays, this is 1,000 years ago, nowadays we have, treatments that can give us a few more months. But once you're in hospice, that's pretty much it. Although a friend of mine recently was in hospice and he decided that he didn't want to die. So he took himself out of hospice and actually he's still going strong, but not sure for how long. We humans living on this earth are like streams and rivers flowing toward the ocean. All living beings are heading for that single destination. So in the teachings, Lamrim teachings on death, we have these different analogies, like life is like a waterfall. From the moment we're born, we're just rushing towards death, like a stone dropped into a deep well, maybe not so deep, and different things like that. Like streams and rivers flowing towards the ocean, all beings are headed for that single destination. Now, like a small bird flying off from a treetop, I too will not be here much longer. Soon I must move on. So that was Padampa Sangye's assessment of his situation. So then he gave these verses of advice as his last teaching. If you spend the present meaninglessly and leave with empty hands, people of Tingri, a human life in future will be very hard to find. So he's alluding to, what I mentioned before, what we have now, the perfect human rebirth. And if we spend the life meaninglessly and leave with empty hands, a human life in future will be hard to find. So, of the three positive destinations that we can aim for, enlightenment is obviously the best, and it is possible to attain enlightenment in a single lifetime. But, they say that, but we have to have created enormous merit in previous lives to be reborn in a human life in which we can reach enlightenment, like Milarepa did, for example. So that's hard to attain in a lifetime, but it is possible to attain liberation in a lifetime, mainly through realizing emptiness. But, for us to realize emptiness, we have to have, there are these 3 higher trainings that we have to practice in order to attain liberation, which is attained by realizing emptiness. So we need to have perfect, pure morality. So we have the perfect practice of discipline or moral conduct or ethics, different words. And then on the basis of pure morality, living a life of pure moral conduct, we have to develop perfect single-minded concentration. So without a foundation of pure ethical conduct, it's very difficult to attain single-pointed concentration. And without single-pointed concentration, it's very difficult to realize emptiness, which itself also depends not only on perfect concentration, but on deep study of the teachings of the right view. And there are different levels of that. When Geshe teaches tenets, Geshe Tenli taught Drupta tenets.
He's done it a couple of times, I think.
Yeah. So that the four schools, the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. And in the Madhyamaka, the two schools, Svatantrika and Prasangika. So the highest view is the Prasangika, and we get to it by studying those lower schools, their explanation of the way things exist. And so on the basis of studying that and then meditating on it, and reaching understanding of the emptiness through logical deduction, then we have to focus on that conclusion that things are empty of inherent existence. We have to focus on that with single point of concentration. So, there's a lot of stuff to accomplish before we can realize emptiness. So again, it's very hard, I think, for most of us who have worldly responsibilities and can't go off into a cave for decades and meditate. It's going to be difficult to realize emptiness in this life and to attain liberation. So what does that leave us with? Well, better future lives. So we have to use this perfect human rebirth to at least get another perfect human rebirth in our next life so that we can continue on this path. So guaranteeing that is also quite difficult. This book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Perfect Human Rebirth, published by the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. This book was for sale, but now we're giving it away. And the PDF is available online. So it's just one step on the path to enlightenment, the teaching on the perfect human rebirth. And so this is set out according to the outline in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which Geshe hasn't finished that yet, has he? Been going for a few years. Did he finish Liberation?
No, we didn't finish yet.
No. So in the outline on liberation, it sort of mentions that we shouldn't waste our life. But when Lama Zopa Rinpoche taught Lam Rim, he gave extensive teachings on the 8 worldly dharmas. So in this book, How to Practice Dharma, which was for sale, but it's going to be free. I think it is free. And PDF will be online soon. But this is all about how we render our human life, perfect human rebirth, meaningless by following the 8 worldly dharmas. So these are really fundamental teachings, and it's just sort of mentioned in this verse, if you spend the present meaninglessly and leave with empty hands, human life in future will be very hard to find. So who knows what perfect human rebirth is? What are the attributes of it? Anybody? I heard when I was lurking, I heard the word interactive. So this is the interactive part. I get to drink hot water and you get to talk. What's a perfect human rebirth? Nobody?
Has the 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses?
Yeah, who's saying that?
Laura,
Okay, what are they?
I'm not sure if I could name them all.
Come on.
So the freedom from being born as a hell realm being, freedom from being born as a preta being, freedom from being born as an animal being, freedom from being born as a sura or anasura or an intermediate state being, freedom from being born in a
There's no freedom from being born in the intermediate state. That's not.
oh, you can't be free from that, right? You can't avoid that.
Not at the moment.
Right. Not being born in a barbarian country. Not having any mental or physical defects. And then there's one more, right? So there's something more, which I'm not sure of.
Two more.
2 more. Maybe someone else knows the last 2.
Anybody?
The teachings
There's
haven't
one-
declined.
What?
The teachings have not declined.
Sort of.
The support for the Sangha. Oh, I'm on the 10. I'm on the 10. That's from the 10.
No, that we're on the
We're on
eight,
the book.
eight freedoms at the moment.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm wrong.
There's freedom from being born when a Buddha has not appeared, and then freedom from being born when a Buddha has not taught.
That's in the
Get
richness.
that? Those are the richnesses. Okay.
Okay. So one of the 8 freedoms is not being born in what's called a dark period, or sorry, not being born where there are no teachings. So in a, I think they call it as not being born as a barbarian. Means a person without access to the Dharma, basically. And one more.
Isn't it freedom from having committed one of the 5? No,
That's not a freedom.
Hmm.
That's counted in the 10 richnesses, which we'll be coming to in a moment. See, if we don't meditate on these freedoms and richnesses, it makes it harder to appreciate the life that we have. It's this meditation's, it's one of the first ones. It's when we talk about the way the Lam Rim is set up, you have this kind of preamble sections where it talks about the greatness of the authors and the greatness of the Dharma and how to listen, how to teach, and then how disciples are led on the path. So, and then that's divided into, having devotion to the spiritual teacher, and then having, what do we do once we're devoted to a spiritual teacher, and so, having become devoted, then how do we actually practice, and then what do we do once we're devoted? So the first, there's again 2 sections. The first is how to, exhorting ourselves to extract the essence from the perfect human rebirth, and then how to extract the essence. So this is really sort of part of the rocket fuel to propel us to enlightenment. So to realize how rare and precious the perfect human rebirth is. So we need to know these 18 fundamental things and meditate on them to gain more and more appreciation, so that we're less and less inclined to render the life meaningless. So the first four freedoms are freedom from having been born in non-human states. So hell, hungry ghost, three lower realms, then the higher realms of Sura and Asura, as Laura mentioned. And then even though we're born human, there are a number of unfree states that prevent us from practicing Dharma. So one is being born in what's called a dark period. So where the Buddha hasn't taught. So don't want to spend too much time on this, but if so a world system like the one we're in this little corner of space where the Earth is located, going around the sun, a few other planets and that. There are four stages of the evolution and devolution of a world system. Does it sound familiar? So, so at the moment we're in what's called the great eon of relative stability. So things are relatively stable, but changing all the time, of course, everything's impermanent. Then eventually this world system will get worse and worse, even worse than it is now, and it'll eventually disintegrate with wind, fire, water, whatever, however a world system disintegrates. So that'd be like the great eon of devolution. And then there's no physical matter. Everything is broken up into, I don't know, subatomic particles or something. The energy doesn't disappear, but it's not tangible anymore. And there are no sentient beings can live in that situation. And then so eventually though, things start to coalesce and come together again. So then there's the great eon of evolution. So the world system goes through these four cycles, these four great eons. The great eon is kind of inconceivable amount of time. So it's only during the period of the great eon of relative stability, like this one, that that a Buddha can appear and give teachings. But still, within a great eon of relative stability, there are 20 lesser eons where the human lifespan. So in the God realms, the gods have sort of ethereal bodies and extremely long lifespans, and great enjoyments and stuff, which is ripening of certain kind of positive karma. But it's not really a life in which is suitable for Dharma practice, because as we know from the very first teaching the Buddha gave, the Four Noble Truths, the first one is teaching on suffering. So in the God realm, there's very little suffering to be found. And the only suffering really is when the lifespan of a God comes to an end and their, light bodies, the light decreases and their sweet smell disappears and they start to smell bad and they get kind of old and shriveled, a bit like me, and so then all their friends can't even, they just get deserted by their friends, which is also another kind of suffering they have. And furthermore, not through spiritual development, but through karma, they can actually have a vision of their future life, which is most likely in the lower realms. And it's such contrast to the life that they can see they're leaving, that the suffering is said, that suffering is said to be worse than the actual rebirth in the hell realm, which is generally considered the worst kind of suffering. So so they have, but generally they have very long lifespans. However, as the seed of attachment grows and they start to develop desire for material things, they start to manifest as so the first humans, which are born in the desire realm, have very long lifespans, said to be like 10,000 years long. And so gradually their lifespan decreases and their bodies become more and more gross until on the way down, as the lifespan gets shorter and shorter to around 80 to 100 years. That's sort of the period that we're in now. And that's the time where the human karma was such that they were receptive to Dharma, and in this period, so this is called the fortunate eon, when 1,000 Buddhas manifest. So Shakyamuni Buddha was the fourth of the 1,000. Maitreya Buddha, he'll be the fifth. But on the way down, so it takes long time for the lifespan to decrease from 10,000 years to 80 to 100 now. So on the way down, that's when the humans have karma to be receptive to the Dharma teachings, and that's when the Buddha appears on earth, goes through the 12 deeds and gives a teaching in Bodhgaya, and then 2,600 years later, we're still able to receive these teachings, but it's getting less and less possible, as we can see. People are becoming more and more materialistic. The world is getting sort of rougher and rougher, and even though we see the lifespan is increasing, it's increasing a little bit from maybe 70 to 80 or something like that. But I see that it went down during COVID in America, and now it's going back up a little bit. But the big picture is the life will get shorter and shorter, and then the Dharma will completely disappear, they say after like 5,000 years. And then the world gets worse and worse, and the lifespan gets more and more violent, and human lifespan decreases down to about 10 years, and then the world is really terrible. And then it starts to increase again as that karma sort of finishes, and better karma starts to ripen, and lifespan goes up again to 10,000 years. So, but it's only on the downward curve that the karma is right for the Dharma teaching. So for the most part, the human lives exist for eons. I mean, there are humans for eons, but it's only just this very short window, 5,000 years in billions, that the Buddha can appear and give teachings. So you can be born human, and outside that window, and that's called the dark period. So you can be born human, but there's no Dharma teaching. So no way to practice Dharma, and all you do is you live and you create negative karma and get reborn in the lower realms. So there's freedom from being born in that period. Is the fifth freedom, Ed.
when we say reborn, like future, like way future, because this goes on for infinity. When we say human rebirth, if you project far enough, way, 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 it's not human the way we understand, is it? Nor is it in this world system, is it?
It doesn't necessarily have to be in this world system. I mean, we can be reborn here on Earth, but as we see, as we will see in a moment, it's not that easy.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying what happens when this world goes, when this solar system goes, and this galaxy goes.
Yeah, this is only one of billions of galaxies throughout the infinite universe.
And so you're going to be born in a different galaxy?
Can be, yeah. It depends. Okay. Depends on our karma and what's going on. If our karma is such that we've created really good karma, and to be born in an excellent situation as a human, and things on Earth have got so bad that this doesn't fit that karma, then we can be born in a world system somewhere else. I mean, even in this galaxy, there are so many, world systems that even the astronomers will tell us that, And I remember years ago reading a book called by Carl Sagan and a Russian guy, a counterpart called Ivan Shklovsky, a book called Intelligent Life in the Universe. And that was before I knew anything about Dharma or anything. And even there, they were saying there, even in this galaxy, that's the likelihood of this being the only place where there's a life as we know it is basically impossible. So, and this is only one galaxy in countless billions throughout infinite space and infinite time. So, even if Earth has devolved to such an extent, after 5,000 years or whatever, that there's no Dharma, but we have the karma to be reborn human, to receive a perfect human rebirth with 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses, then we can be born in another solar system or another galaxy somewhere else, far, far away. So that's the 5th. So the 6th freedom, so we kind of think in terms of narrowing it down. So you're not born human, then you're born human, but there's no Dharma teachings because it's not in that 5,000-year window, even though there's humans before and after. So you can be born human at a time when the Buddha's teachings exist, but in a place where the teachings haven't reached or where the teachings don't exist. So, the Buddha appeared in India and he's giving teachings and it's all going great over there, but you're born in America, 2,500 years ago, and or in Australia, and all that's there is the Aboriginals or the Native Americans, but there's no Dharma teaching. And, they may have their own spiritual traditions and this and that, or if you were born in Tibet 2,500 years ago, you've got the Bon religion, but none of it is Dharma. There's no teachings on emptiness, there's no teachings on bodhicitta, there's some kind of strange beliefs and sacrifices to the gods and all this stuff. So, and no teachings on morality, no teachings on developing single point concentration and so forth. So if you're born in, you're not born in a dark period because the teachings exist on Earth, but you're born in a place where the teachings haven't reached. So being free from that situation is the 6th freedom. And then the 7th freedom, which I don't think anyone mentioned, is the freedom from being born. You can be born at a time where the teachings exist, in a place where the teachings exist, but you're mentally handicapped, or well, I don't know what you're allowed to say these days. Mentally challenged, or traditional teachings said foolish, or deaf and foolish. So doesn't mean so foolish. I mean, you can still get Dharma imprints. You can circumambulate stupas. Your parents can teach you to do prostrations and things like that, but you can't really study, or if you're mentally, if that's the situation. So the perfect human rebirth, the emphasis on perfect, so you can receive the teachings, you can understand the teachings, even complicated ones like on emptiness and so forth, and you can develop faith. Faith is very important. Faith based on understanding. But even blind faith is still. I remember one of our teachers, Geshe Rabden, who was he was Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's main teacher in the refugee camp in Buxa, Geshe Rabden. Great Sarah Geshe. He said, so after Buxa, he went after the refugee camp, he went to Dharamsala, and he was one of the main teachers, and he taught a bunch of Westerners in Dharamsala. He was one of the teachers. One of his main Western students was Alan Wallace. And then eventually he was in Dharamsala for a while, and then eventually His Holiness sent him. There was a monastery established in Switzerland, so he went to be the abbot, and then soon after that he established his own centre in Mont Pelerin, down on Lake Geneva. And a lot of Westerners studied with him there. So he said when they were in Tibet, and they used to look down. So we see at Kurukulla centres, the Palas and the Amalas, the elders, they come to the centre and they circumambulate the stupa, and they sit around and they're reciting, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. They're doing their manis constantly, and then they sit down, have tea, and they're still doing their mantras and chatting, and then they do a few circumambulations and things like that. Sorry. I started with a full battery, but it's telling me it's going to run out. So I'll have to get my charger, sorry. So he said they used to scoff, the Geshes used to scoff at the old Tibetans. They look at them, just all they can do is circumambulate and say mantras. But then he said, when I got to the West and saw how people live there, I thought, oh my God, how fortunate these Tibetan elders are. At least they circumambulate and they recite manis. They, creating merit all day, every day. So, even though, they don't do the deep studies and stuff, still their lives are not meaningless. So I'm not saying they don't have perfect human rebirth, because their minds are capable and their bodies are capable. But the thing about being deaf is, of course, you can read books and you do sign language and stuff like that. But what you can't receive oral transmissions, which are considered a very important part of the lineage, where the teachings have come down in unbroken stream from the time of the Buddha himself, through the great Indian teachers and the Tibetan teachers, and through the great lamas, through His Holiness, and so on down to us. So if you're deaf, you can't. So it's pretty good human rebirth, but it's not perfect. So that's why the seventh freedom is considered freedom from being, they call it foolish. You see that we get emails from people saying, "How dare you say people are foolish?" It's so judgmental. You have to understand what the actual implication of the term is. The Tibetan term, I think it's Lonpa, not sure. So before I get my charger, the eighth freedom is freedom from having wrong views, fixed wrong views. So, or being in a place where you can't practice Dharma because the authorities won't allow it. Like, I think if you're in a strict Muslim country, for example, you're not even allowed to give up being a Muslim. Or, like in, I don't know, I'm not sure, but like Saudi Arabia, you get punished, executed for so many things. I think, walking around Jeddah, Mecca, reciting Tibetan mantras could get you into trouble. Or, or your parents are strong anti-religion and you're brought up that way, or in communist countries, or even in Tibet now, you can get, if you have pictures of His Holiness, or it's becoming more and more restricted what you can do, and you get sent to prison or even killed for doing certain practices. So freedom from being in that kind of situation is the eighth freedom. So, as I say, it's like, if poker had 8 cards, so, thinking how fortunate I am not to have been born in the hells, it's like an ace. How fortunate I am not to have been born as a hungry ghost, another ace. Fortunate not to have been born an animal. So like that, if you have a hand with 8 aces, maybe a double pack of cards. So that's like a perfect human rebirth is, drawing a hand from 2 packs of cards, with all aces. That's about as good as it gets. Because you can't have a royal flush with 8 cards. Can you? Maybe you could. Anyway, I'll leave you with that for a moment while I get my charger. I tell you, don't get old. So you really feel it in your legs. Okay, so that's the 8 freedoms. So anyone had time to look up the 10 richnesses? Impress everybody?
I have a list. Yeah, I can read the list.
Why don't you do that?
So it says, I think this is from the translation on Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. So the first richness is being born as a human. Second, being born in a religious country. The third, being born with perfect organs. The fourth, being free of the 5 extreme actions. The fifth, having devotion to the teachings. The sixth, being born as a Buddha when a Buddha has descended. The seventh, being born when the teachings have been revealed. The eighth, being born when the complete teachings exist. The ninth, being able to follow the teachings. And the 10th, having the necessary conditions to practice Dharma.
Okay, any questions about that? Anyway, it's all explained in great detail in this book. So again, when we meditate on that, we think, and there's a little crossover between the freedoms and the richnesses, but I think how fortunate I am to have been born human. If I hadn't been, it'd be impossible to practice Dharma. So, not only have I been born human, but I've been born in the center of a religious country. Is that what it said? Does it say center of a religious country, the second one? Being born in a religious country. So I think traditionally it says center of a religious country, but religious country, it can be, there are 2 meanings. One is like a central, they call the central land, like being born in India, being born in Bodhgaya is kind of the center of the Buddhist world. It was. So there's a geographic implication, but a religious country is defined also as one in which the lineage of the ordinations exist. So lineage of the organization of the ordination means you can take precepts. So you can take 5 lay precepts, or you can take 36 novice precepts, or you can take the 253 or 364 precepts of fully ordained monk or nun. They're the 8 Mahayana precepts that we take for a day. Different kinds of precepts. So why it's, take killing, for example, why it's important to take a vow not to kill rather than simply saying, well, I don't kill anyway, so why should I take a vow? We have to understand how karma works. And when we create karma, positive or negative, there are 4 aspects to the action. There's the motivation. So, we did that at the beginning. The motivation has to come at the beginning. Your motivation for doing an action. So killing can be out of anger or hatred or jealousy, or it can be different kinds of negative mind. The motivation, the object. So for killing, the object, there has to be a sentient being whose life can be taken. Then there's the action, like you shoot someone, or cut their throat, or you give the order to somebody else. Like you're running an army, you tell all your soldiers to go and wipe out that population. Even you don't do it yourself, you give the order. So that's also the action of killing. So it can be done directly or indirectly, the action. And then the result, that the sentient being has to die before you do. Before you do means that if there's a duel to the death and you both die, then the one who dies first doesn't get the karma of the fullness of the karma, because it didn't get the other person dying on their mind stream. So the other sentient being has to die before you do, and then you get the full imprint of all four aspects of the action on your mind stream. So if you do a complete action like that, then you get what's known as the ripening result. So the ripening result is determines the realm where you're reborn. So there's the result. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to call the fullness of the sin, which sound a little bit religious, but I mean, you do all those four actions and you get the complete result. Rebirth in the hells, most likely, for killing. Then there are two results similar to the cause. There's the result similar to the cause in experience, where what you did to the other comes back on you. You reap what you sow. So in terms of killing, you'll get killed in a future life by maybe that sentient being who you killed, or you'll have a short life with a lot of disease and stuff like that. So that's the result similar to the cause in experience. And there's a result similar to the cause in habit or tendency, where you tend to do the same action again. So, karma actions are sort of habit forming. If you kill once, it's easier to kill a second time, a third time, and so on. So so you can see there's even little children. There are some that are very compassionate towards insects, but there are others who are very cruel. They want to stomp on ants or kill any insect they see, or spiders or whatever. So that's an example of how that works. And then there's the fourth karmic result, the environmental result. So it determines the situation or the country or the family that you're born into. So you can be born into a peaceful place or a very dangerous place, or you can be born into a place that's peaceful and then becomes dangerous. All kinds of things we can just see looking around the world. So the different environments in which either you're born or in which you find yourself, it's a karmic result. So that's why when we do purification, we have to have the four opponent powers. So each of those powers, regret, the power of the object, the reliance, regret, remedy, and resolve. Sometimes the 4 R's, just to make it easy to remember. I think I remembered. So that's those four. That's why we'd have, when we do purification, we do the 4 powers, because each one opposes one of those 4 results. And so you can purify the negativity that way. So abstaining from killing is good as far as it goes, but if you don't take a vow not to kill, what it doesn't do is taking the vow stops the karmic result of having a tendency to do the action again. So Rinpoche used to say that of the 4 kind of results, the worst one is that where you have the tendency to create the negative karma again and again, because that way if you keep doing that, there's no way to get out of cyclic existence. So it's important to take the vow not to kill, because that kind of, I don't know how to say it, sends a sort of a neutralizing shockwave back in your mind to stop the tendency to do that negative action again. So being the second richness of being in a religious country is where the lineage of the different ordinations exist. So you can take these different levels of vows, and the more vows you take, so with vows, it's, the more you take, the better, because there's more negative tendencies you're neutralizing or counteracting. The longer you keep them, the better. So if you take it for a year, that's good. If you keep them for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, that's 2, 3, 4 times better. The more purely you keep them, the better. So the more you keep, the longer you keep them, the more purely you keep them without breaking them, the better. And fourthly, the more quickly you purify broken vows, the better. So that means we have to be kind of vigilant in watching our behavior and knowing when we're breaking a vow, or even tending towards breaking a vow so we can stop it. But if we break it, then the sort of regret we feel. So, that's one of the purifying powers, power of regret, also. It's called repentance sometimes. Just where you recognize that you've broken a vow and you can see, oh, that was a mistake, and you feel not guilty, but just, I made a mistake, I need to repair that, so. So it's better not to break. Lama Yeshe used to say, if you break a cup, you can repair it, but it's never quite what it was. You can see where the glue went. So, but still, if you don't fix it, you can't drink out of it. So, the quicker we recognize a broken vow and purify it, the better. So those 4 things. So that's all part of the importance of keeping vows. And so he says, if you spend the present meaninglessly and leave with empty hands, a human life in future will be very hard to find. So I was going to say that in the teachings on the perfect human rebirth, wasting, when Rinpoche would come to the part about wasting the perfect human rebirth, he would say the main way we waste it is by following the 8 worldly dharmas. And he taught, and that you don't actually find that in that outline in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand so clearly. It's kind of implied. But Rinpoche used to spend a lot of time teaching on that, because we spend most of our time in meaningless actions. So that's how we could get a whole book on meaningless actions, on wasting the perfect human rebirth, in this book, How to Practice Dharma. Because the line, the border between Dharma and non-Dharma is whether we're creating negative karma or creating positive karma. And by following the 8 worldly dharmas, no time to call for a list now, but we render our perfect human rebirth meaningless. And we did all this work to get here, and then we completely blow it. So the main cause, 2 main causes of being reborn in the upper realms as a human or as a god, 2 main causes are morality and generosity. So of the 6 perfections, those are the first 2: perfection of giving and the perfection of morality. So those 2 practices are necessary to be reborn in the upper realms. So the essence of morality or discipline or pure conduct, whatever you want to call it, sultim, the essence of morality is taking precepts. So to practice morality properly, we need to take the vows not to do these certain negative actions, not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not getting intoxicated, these 5 lay vows, for example. So without taking vows, we don't really practice morality properly. So if we don't practice morality properly, we don't get just an upper rebirth as a human, any kind of human, or as a god, but if we practice perfectly, then we can receive another perfect human rebirth with all the perfect opportunity to practice Dharma and continue making progress on the path. So as we see, it's very hard to attain liberation in this life. It's even harder to get enlightenment, but we can more reasonably create a cause for getting another perfect human rebirth. So if we want to attain these higher goals of liberation and enlightenment, we need to have a series of perfect human rebirths in order to make kind of steady progress, rather than have a perfect unit and then go back to lower realms for a few eons and then maybe climb back up and so on like that. So that's what we can do, but practice morality. And to do that, we need precepts, and to do that, we need to be in the right place at the right time. So that's the second richness. I think we have to stop now. Well, we did 1 out of 100 pieces of advice. Didn't even finish, but that's progress. So bear with me. Let's do a bit more next time. And thank you very much. I think, Bob, just if you do the short dedication, I think. I can't hear anything.
Sorry, folks. The Thanksgiving model offering. Saji Perki Duksing Me Tok Tram Re Rabling Jini Degen Pade Sangye Jingdu Mikte Uwagi Droku Nang Dwagjing Lacher Pashu Jetsun Lame Kutse Rabten Ching Nam Katrin Le Chok Choge Padang Lo Sang Ten Pedren Me Sasungi Droen Mun Sel Tak Tu Negyu Chik Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. His Holiness is Short Long Life Prayer. Where is it? At the bottom of the page. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig remain in life till samsara's end. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus in the hand, Lord Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please return swiftly. Prayer of dedication at the bottom of the page. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Mig med sewe ter chen rezik dri me kenpe wampo jampaliang dupo malu jomze sangwe dag gang chen kepe tsugin son kapa lo sandra pijabla solwa deb. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Bob, everybody. So we did the prayers, but what we're saying is, the last couple of hours, because we generated bodhicitta at the beginning and we studied this these holy teachings a little bit, so we created a lot of merit. So before the merit we created is destroyed by wrong views and anger, so we dedicate it, we reaffirm its direction to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So, merit is very precious. It's the main cause of all happiness and success. And it's not very often we create a lot. So when we do, we want to make sure it doesn't get wasted or lost or destroyed. So that's why we dedicate it, sort of put it in our merit bank, and then gradually it'll build up so that we have enough merit that we can understand teachings on emptiness and realize. Okay, thank you very much, and hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Nick.
Nick.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bob.
Nick.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.